I've started going to the gym in the morning. And the beauty of the gym is that I like to have a swim. We have a swimming pool. And I would spend a good 15, 20 minutes in there. And you can't take any tech into a swimming pool, although people are going to disagree because I have seen people wearing these waterproof headphones. But it's my downtime and I have all my best ideas. I have all my best, I can plan my day.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with the frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you are tuning in for education or inspiration, we're wicked glad you did. Now, turn on those washes and turn up the volume. It's time to go Beyond Clean.
This week on Beyond Clean, we speak with Matthew Peskett, Managing Director at Peskett Solutions. And Hank, I know you've had a lot of conversations with the team at the D Conversations podcast. And that not only includes our guest today, Matthew Peskett, but also Pavel, who has been a two-time guest on this show, and Daniel Kuhl, and really just love seeing other podcasts pop up in the industry, but also interested in this conversation. And, we're about to talk to Matthew about a career. And we've had some episodes like this before, but not quite coming at it from the way we are today.
Yeah, Justin, I've been aware of Matthew for a couple of years now. He's been active, as are a lot of our guests, on LinkedIn. And I think the first time I got to meet him in person was at the World Congress in 2019 in the Netherlands. But as you said, he's doing a lot of great work. He's a part of a lot of great conversations and networking, especially in the UK, but really around the globe. And so anytime that we are aware of someone like that, it's just a matter of time. We've only got so many slots in each season, and we do try to be strategic about the kinds of conversations that we have. But this is one that's a long time coming. And I know, folks, if you clicked on this episode and you're listening now, you clicked for a reason, but you may have seen the title and think, what? The UK in the 1980s, what's all that about? I think you're going to be surprised because there's going to be some themes that come up that are very applicable no matter where you're from, how long you've been in the industry, what you think about your career, because all of this is tied into just humans in jobs working together and what that means for you and for everyone else around you. It's going to be a fun conversation.
Yeah, I can't wait. So let's get right to it. We'll be back after a short break with Matthew Peskett. I'm Justin Poulin.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Joining us now is Matthew Peskett, Managing Director at Peskett Solutions, and we're going to be talking not only about the history of sterile services, but we're also hopping across the pond again, as we always like to say whenever we interview from abroad. And, Pavel is one of those friends of the show that's been on several times, as is Daniel Kuhl. But Matthew, we haven't had you on yet, and you come from the D Conversations podcast. And so those names are all intertwined if anybody is not listening to your podcast yet today. And we're not trying to hog the podcast space. And we want to promote your work because this industry needs more voices. And I'm so happy to have you on the show for your first appearance. Thanks for coming on.
No, thank you for having me. And it's good that you gave us a plug because one day we want to be as big as Beyond Clean.
Well, just keep chugging away. As Hank will tell you, you got to spend a lot of time on social media. And I don't know if you saw, this will be a little, old by the time people listen to this. But today, Hank posted on LinkedIn a picture of all of his babies. He had his boys in the picture, but above that, he had the smartphone applications for not only Beyond Clean, but First Case Power Supply as well. And so I always laugh because to really drive that, you've got to have a little bit of blend of personal and business, and you got to be present on LinkedIn. So I think you all are doing a great job with that. Just keep it up.
Thank you. Well, we really enjoy it because people like to come on and have a chat. Like yourselves, we chat.
So why don't we start in kind of an unconventional way about getting your background, right? Talk to us about just who you were as a person in the 80s when you were discovering sterile services. And maybe you can walk us through a little bit of just a timeline and some of the things that you remember to paint the picture for the audience.
No, that's good. I mean, I left school at 16. I decided that I wanted to become a blacksmith. I double-checked that word is actually known in the US. But I did actually put metalsmith in brackets just in case blacksmith didn't come up. Or I wanted to become a Royal Marine bandsman. I play the trumpet. I haven't played it for a number of years. I used to be in a marching band. And so I decided that they were going to be my career choices. But life is funny at curveballs. And basically, I didn't have anything lined up. My father worked at the London Hospital, Whitechapel, in the admin department. He knew that there was this temporary job in sterile services in what we called the Dental Institute. So it was processing dental instruments. So I went along. It was money for beer and partying. And it was temporary. It was going to be a temporary job. And the lady that I was covering, she retired. And so I thought, well, I'll carry on until I get a proper job. As they say, the rest is history. So I was a part-time DJ at the weekends. That was another little earner, which I enjoyed. And being a DJ in the 80s was quite good fun. So that was my how I got into sterile services.
So, Matthew, we've got a lot in common, it sounds like. I also played the trumpet.
Wow. Okay. Hang on. I've got mine here somewhere.
Yeah, my amateur.
Just so you know, I've known Hank for a long time. This is the first time I have learned that he played the trumpet. So hey. I appreciate you coming on the show and pulling out another element of Hank's background.
The other thing that we have in common is we both work for beer money. I think we're probably still working for beer money and party money still this day. So not much has changed there. But I appreciate your honesty, obviously, in how you fell into the industry. And we love asking people that because so many people come in different ways. And especially for newer folks out there considering, do they want to come into sterile services or sterile processing? Like, do they want to dedicate their life and career? It's important for those folks to know, and even the younger folks, coming in up out of school, that you don't necessarily have to have this grand plan and your entire life sketched out before you do something. The fact that you get involved and you get that opportunity to get exposure to healthcare, get exposure to sterile processing, that's when you really start to say, hey, I either love this and I want to keep doing it, or you know what? This is not the right fit for me, and you change your trajectory. But so many folks I talk to that are on the younger side of things, like they're almost like, I can't make the wrong decision or I'm going to screw up my entire life. But that's really not the case.
No, I mean, I look back and it was a good decision because I've made a complete career out of it. I mean, I'm not 16 anymore. I'm 56. So I've been in decontamination for 40 years. I haven't always loved it, but I've done very well by it, and I've met some fantastic and interesting people. And I'd like to put a shout out for my old boss, who I believe is still around, Gillian Sills. She was the one that inspired me to have a career in sterile services because I was all ready to leave because I always thought there was always something better around the corner. She said, had I ever considered management? Well, I hadn't because I was looking at a way out. So Gillian Sills, thank you for believing in me. And I know she's still out there, and I don't know if she listens into your podcasts, but it'd be great if she knows that she was a great inspiration to me.
Now, Matthew, this whole interview is probably going to make you feel a little old, but I'm going to make you particularly feel old here. So I was born in 1984, okay? So I'm about to ask you about your general memories of what the UK hospital experience would have been like in the 80s, but just so you know, that could have been describing the moment that little Hank was born into the world. If I was born in the UK, what would the hospital have looked like?
I gotta make him feel a little bit better. I was born in 75, so I at least have memories of the music that was released in the time period.
At least you were sitting in the middle, yeah.
Right. There's a lot of Tina Turner.
Yeah, well, you've really missed out, because the 80s was a really great era for music, especially British music. I don't know what the Americans were producing at the time, but I mean...
Well, hold on. If you're going to throw that out there, I got to know what you were listening to. I mean, are you on the Sid Vicious side of this thing, or when you say great music, what there's an eclectic mix?
Oh, now you're putting me on the spot. There was a lot of soul bands came out of the UK. Kool and the Gang. I'm trying to think of others. Ultravox. I know they weren't soul, but OMD. These are all groups I went to when I was a youngster. At the Hammersmith Palais, if there's any Brits out there listening. And it was a great, fantastic era for music. So, but my memories of working in UK hospitals is that I made a few notes here. Met my wife in sterile services.
Oh, wow.
I made her wait a while. We met when basically I was 18, so I'd been there a couple of years and we met, and we've been together ever since. We recently...
That's awesome. Congratulations on that, by the way.
We probprobly met in 82 while you were still... glimmering of I was trying to think of a good expression. So, but we go with that. We go with that. So... and, what I liked about the working in hospitals in the 80s is, I don't know, it just felt like there was less pressure. It was like a big family. We used to have lots of parties. I don't think we used to take things as seriously as we do now. Christmas was fantastic in the hospital, with all the different departments getting together. But my claim to fame is that, have you heard of The Elephant Man?
Great movie. I don't know if anybody's still watching that. I think it was black and white, but I remember watching it. My father had me watch it when I was like 8 years old. It's slightly traumatic.
Well, it was, and it wasn't an old film. It was actually deliberately filmed in black and white to give it that sort of authentic Victorian feel. But what's fascinating is that working at the London Hospital, a lot of the buildings that were, including the church that he built, are there still. And his body is in the London Hospital Medical School. So, and this is a confession now. If anybody is listening from my past employment, I actually sneaked out of the department with a couple of ladies and decided to take them to a medical school. Now, officially, you're not supposed to go in there, but the security guard was being kind to me that night because he saw I was with a couple of ladies and I was trying to show off to them. So, so we went to visit the Elephant Man. So he's there. But also my sort of minor claim to fame is watching Michael Jackson visiting the Elephant Man. I was walking down the road. It was, I can't remember when, but this little figure with a silver glove came out of a limo and rushed into the medical school, because apparently every time Michael was in the UK, he used to like to visit his friend, the Elephant Man, and he tried to buy it from them, but they wouldn't sell it to him. So, but
that sounds like something Michael Jackson would do.
It's not obviously not an issue now. Yeah, but I remember that well.
So I love those stories, Matthew. And again, this is the whole reason that I brought you on, not only because I knew you would tell good stories, but two, because we can get so uptight in our industry. And you just mentioned like a great point, back in the 80s and even, probably the early 90s, our approach, to who we are as an industry and department was different. And it wasn't that we didn't care about patient safety and quality. We'll probably talk more about that here in a moment. Like, that's not the point. It's almost like we have come to the stage to where we're a little maybe too self-important and too stodgy to not even be able to have fun with each other and enjoy working with each other. And that's like a cultural piece, like we bring up again and again, like team dynamics. We don't like each other. We don't work well with each other. We don't know how to communicate. And I totally, like, you're not the first person who has said that one of their fondest memories about the earlier industry is that we actually enjoyed each other and had fun. And, did things like go see the Elephant Man at the medical school,
Yeah, there's other stories that are not broadcastable. Okay. But they tended to revolve around the Christmas parties. So,
okay. So, to get a little more specific, you're kind of painting that broad outline, but I do want to drill down into the life in sterile services as a worker in those days. So, because you have spanned the decades in your experience, what is done differently today or in yesteryear? Like, what are the big things that kind of come to mind and you say, yeah, we don't do that anymore? Or perhaps we still do that and it's kind of a surprise that we're still doing, this one thing that we did 30 years ago.
Well, obviously there are things that we did 30 years ago that we do now, but I had a good think about it and I thought, well, there was a lot more time-consuming manual jobs back in the day. So I was trying to remember them, and hopefully some of your listeners will actually have been around long enough to also remember them. One of my favourite mind-numbing jobs was packing cotton wool balls. We used to pack them in small packs of 5. So you'd have a bag of 100 cotton wool balls, and you'd have to break them down into little 5s and then sort of seal them. You'd only have to be doing that for a couple of hours to start going a little bit, Well, my mind definitely used to wander. The other thing was gowns. Gowns used to be made of linen, cotton, and they used to be laundered back then. And what we used to do is we had to check them for holes to make sure they're okay. And we used to have a light table. And to be honest with you, we tended to reject more than we packed. And, and when I was on, one of my favourite memories is when I used to be on this sterilisation duty. I needed to air and then fold are you familiar with huckabuck towels?
No.
Well, huckabuck towels used to be the original Bowie Dick test. And I actually Googled them to see if there was a reference to them. And you used to have to make up a test pack of between 29 to 36 towels. And then they would be stacked to a height of like 10 to 11 inches. And then a sheet of paper with autoclave tape in the pattern of a St. Andrew's cross used to be put in the middle. And then you sort of tie them all up and put them in the sterilizer. And that was the early Bowie Dick test. And it worked quite well, but what was so time consuming is each time the towels had to be unfolded and aired. So it was a bit like a Chinese laundrette around my station. So
I don't think we called them huckabuck, but I do not remember personally, but I remember conversations around, having to put your own pack together to do the challenge. But, we've been talking a lot about progress. And one of the things that really stood out to me that you just said was there were a lot of these manual types of jobs, including making these packs. Nothing was sort of prepackaged and ready and manufactured. Over time, we've done a lot of things that have progressed the industry, right? To make it more consistent, to make it more replicatable. I think there's some positives in that from just removing human error and quality wise getting some more consistency and the ability to check that. But are there things that you really miss about the reprocessing industry? I know you miss the culture in the healthcare environment. I heard that loud and clear, but really specific to the job itself. Is there something that you think is missing or that you liked better?
I was thinking about this question and I couldn't really, because the fundamentals of medical device processing, apart from the technology, are pretty much the same, even in the 80s. They would come back from theatres, we'd wash them, then pack them, then sterilise them. A lot of the packaging materials we still use steam sterilisers. The washers we use still use sort of, detergent, are very similar. So that hasn't really changed. And so I thought, well, I think it's more to do with the fact that it was there was less pressure. There was a better pace back then. And, I feel that everything's pressurized now. And I've got an example down for myself. With modern technology, we always seem to be in a rush. If I don't reply to an email within an hour, I receive another email why I haven't replied to the last one. And you didn't have that back then because we there was no mobile phones, no email, no internet. It was just an easier pace, and your training would be from a book, wouldn't be from a podcast, it wouldn't be from a YouTube video. You actually had to read books and listen to people, and I suppose that's what I miss. That more sort of interaction between people. You don't tend to get that so much, and I get it. I mean, I'm not adverse to things moving forward, but that's what I do miss.
What I heard loud and clear was you missed not having a lot of distractions, and you really enjoyed being intentional and thoughtful in the role, and really having a very clear focus, which is really tied back to those distractions. And I actually kind of wonder, if there is an element here when you think about all that sort of pressure and the communication and the lack of cultural lightheartedness that helps ease the stress that comes with the job. And I don't think that you felt any less responsibility to the patient because you were thoughtful, intentional, and less distracted with less emails and less pressure. I just think the dynamic of the industry has changed to higher volumes and higher efficiencies. And I think financially that has some positive impacts, but you're talking a lot about just the human interaction. You're talking about the culture, but I wonder what this has had as an impact on leadership, and how do leaders make sure that they can still separate themselves and be intentional and thoughtful and allow themselves the time and ability to truly see an overarching strategy and path, because we all know that we need to get out of that daily grind to really get the vision and to be able to do strategic planning. Do you think that might be a negative of some of these high pressure and a lack of de-stressing built into the culture?
It's interesting because now this is probably a strange example, but I've started going to the gym in the morning, and the beauty of the gym is that I like to have a swim. We have a swimming pool, and I would spend a good 15-20 minutes in there. And you can't take any tech into a swimming pool, although people are going to disagree, because I have seen people wearing these waterproof headphones, but it's my downtime, and I have all my best ideas. I have all my best I can plan my day because there's no other distractions, and it works really well for me. So I think if people were given the opportunity of actually having thinking time, downtime from the tech, almost sort of, lock themselves in a room with nothing else other than their thoughts, then I think managers and leaders would find, solutions to problems without relying on those distractions. I mean, I hope that makes sense.
It does. And I wanted to bring up actually another point about the distractions that you mentioned earlier with the mobile phones, because that's been kind of a constant conversation here recently among some folks. And obviously we're very pro technology at Beyond Clean because of how we deliver these podcasts and do everything else. But in talking to this newer generation again, who was born with the mobile phone in their diaper, to ask them to, hey, put your phone away and focus on the task at hand, or, perhaps even, God forbid, leave your phone in your locker before you come on the floor. It's like asking them to deny, their faith or something. In even that story that you mentioned, like in the 80s and early 90s, no one had a cell phone.
No.
In these departments, and they were working and they were happy and they were productive and everything was okay. The house wasn't burning down, somehow we made it. And so,
well, we used to talk to each other. That was the difference. I mean, again, this is a different analogy. There's a training centre called Eastwood Park in the UK. I don't know if you've heard of it. I used to go to training courses back in the 80s, and we always used to meet in the bar after the training day. And, you know, it was a bit of light relief. And there was a real buzz, you know, you could hear chattering and everything. And it had a great atmosphere because everybody's chatting and catching up. Anyway, I was there probably a couple of years ago, about 2019. The bar was busy, but it was dead quiet because everybody was on their phones talking and texting to somebody else that wasn't in the room. They weren't talking to each other. And I was just dumbfounded that, you know, I've seen on holiday groups of girls, and I'm not picking on girls, but 3 girls sitting together on holiday together and all ignoring each other while they're on the phones. I mean, you know, it's a fantastic opportunity of catching up. And the same is in sterile services. If I was still in sterile services, I'd have a rule, a bit like the schools have, that your phone goes in the box on the way in, and you can if you insist on bringing it to work, it goes in the box, and then you can collect it when you leave, because nothing's that important.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to put your email address available for the show notes on this if you want to get any hate mail from these Generation Xers or millennials out there.
Bring it on.
So, speaking of new technicians, you know, we brought this up a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
But I want to give you another opportunity to flesh it out a little bit.
Okay.
What can these new folks learn from the more seasoned employees in their department? Again, like knowing that there are certain skill sets, like the younger generation is probably more comfortable with technology and tracking system and doing new, like software related things, but the older generation has something to offer them. So what is that something? Like, what do they need to be concerned about?
Well, oddly, I didn't come up with a very long list because I couldn't really. I mean, I've always been a fan of technology, and I've seen technology involved in SPD, sterile services, you know, over the years, because staying in the industry, I've seen it evolve. But I suppose if I was going to give him any sage advice, it would be leave your phone at home. And sorry about that. But to remember, I've done it and others do it. There's a fantastic career path in SPD if you stick with it. You know, if you're willing to put the effort in, then it will reward you. Because as I said, I've done very well. So if I was to give them any sort of sage advice, is stick with it. You know, don't see it as a sort of a job to, as I think you said earlier, you know, beer money. You know, look at it as a career, because there's so many aspects of decontamination that you can branch into. So, and you might meet your wife.
Yeah, you're not the first one on the show, I think, who has said they met their spouse working in sterile processing. So yeah, that's a great point.
I wasn't on my phone talking to someone else.
I met my wife on the phone. She was in a completely different industry. I just wasn't paying attention to the job.
Well, that's very honest.
No, it was a joke. Matthew, yeah,
I don't believe it.
So if you could go back in time and tell your 1980s you know, something that you really needed to be knowledgeable of that you've learned over the last many years, you know, what would it be? And I don't want to ask it in that weird way, like, oh, what would you say to yourself? You know, I mean it more like, what do you know now that you couldn't have anticipated then that would have just really guided you properly or in a different direction and saved you, you know, maybe some pain?
Right, sorry.
Was that
distracted.
by Hank's phone? You left your phone in the other room, but Hank's phone still got to you.
Yeah.
Oops.
I turned mine off like a good boy.
I'm going to put it in the box, okay?
Yes, see?
Well, that's hilarious. So, Matthew, why don't I ask you that question again? And again, really saying it from, you know, this, what did you not know then that would really have saved you some hassle or some pain? Not necessarily, oh, if I had known then what I know now.
Well, I mean, it's either my addled memory, but on the whole, it's been all right. It's been pretty good, but I did make some sort of observations. I mean, I think I'd say to myself that if you're asked to do something and you're not sure about it, don't be afraid to question it. Because often we're asked to do things in sterile services that, we may say, well, why are we doing that? Never be frightened to ask a question, even if you feel it's a dumb question, because there's no dumb questions. I also feel that I needed someone to tell me to believe in my abilities and don't give way to bullies. Because, we all work in industries where there's bullies, and there's different types of bullying. It's not just physical, it's mental as well. So if I went back to see my younger self, I'd say, look, just stand up for yourself. You don't have to put up with that. I've always liked the expression, my wife hates this, so I'm putting it in for her. It's don't sweat the small stuff, because every time she has a whinge at me, I say, oh, don't sweat the small stuff. And then, I obviously still don't understand women, or her anyway. So, and this would only work if people could see me, but enjoy your hair while you have it, as one day it will be gone.
And that's why you have it on your face now. So, for those that can't see you, I'm losing mine. I tried to do the Hank beard. It was difficult. It's funny, I just mentioned a post on LinkedIn that Hank put up today that really related to our conversation, but you just said something else that related to a post I put up late last night about really how I found that level of confidence that you just described. And, it's really about, I was doing something, I was podcasting for a passion, and I created a clip from when the Boston Celtics won a championship, and I asked the last question of Kevin Garnett's post-game presser. And there was something about that day when a lot of those pastime kind of efforts really finally came together. Like, I didn't know I was an entrepreneur. I had not started my career in sales. I was still working as a nurse. And it was something about that moment and the culmination of my efforts to cover the team and them winning a championship when things really changed for my confidence level. And if you listen to the entire interview with Kevin Garnett, he talked about achieving that championship in that post-game presser, and he compared it to punching the bully in the mouth and finally overcoming being held down by the bully. So as you were describing that confidence and really saying to people, don't let the bully, prevent you from realizing your full potential, that really resonates with me, particularly today as we're talking, and some things that I've been thinking about and reflecting on over the last 12 hours. And so I don't think there's a person out there who can't relate to what you just said and how important that is. And everybody can find themselves in those environments. And you can do two things. You can say you're a victim of that bully, or you can punch that bully in the mouth, and then you can really drive this industry forward. Yeah. And I really want to hammer that point home as we're wrapping up here today. Thank you for sharing that.
No, you're very welcome. And I do feel strongly about it because, I reflect back and, I look at the people I came across, and you tend to find the bullies in our industries are the ones that are frustrated by either, that they've never been able to achieve it for themselves, so they don't want you to achieve it either. But one final very important point is I also wished I'd gone back and said to myself, buy shares in Microsoft and Apple.
No. Don't buy Bitcoin back when it was nothing.
Yeah. That works too. Yeah. That works too. Yeah.
All right, Matthew, great interview. Thanks for coming on and being so candid. And we really did need a nice, lighthearted conversation like this. We had a lot of fun today, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
That was Matthew Peskett, Managing Director at Peskett Solutions. And Hank, thanks for bringing Matthew on. This is one of the more fun podcasts, and I enjoy them all. But I think there is a serious message in here that it can get very serious, and the job can be very stressful. And we do need to decompress to maintain that passion and that fire, or you can just burn out, not necessarily always from overwork, but over intensity with the pressure, et cetera, that can sometimes be in the job in this industry. And I love that whole conversation where he's talking about Christmas back in the 80s and everybody getting together and having some fun. And, honestly, that's how you break down those barriers that exist between departments that kind of work together, but don't always understand each other's perspective. Like, we don't carve out time for that type of team building. We manufacture some team building by co-educating and things like that, but true team building time without an agenda, how often does that happen anymore?
It really reminded me, Justin, of the interview that we did with Bob Mars a couple of episodes ago on the decades, that he spent in the industry. And we took a different perspective with Bob on how to make your career count. But yeah, I think Matthew's interview here is a great bookend to that conversation, really, on how do you build a career that you look back and say, hey, that was fun. Like, not just did it pay the bills, not just did I get to grow professionally, but I actually enjoyed the people. I enjoyed the industry. And 20, 30, 40 years later, you can be glad about the decision that you make. The stories, that we pulled out of him in this interview, the specific stories, like those are the memories that happen in our departments. Like, we do sneak out of the department sometimes and go do fun things, right? And maybe administrators didn't give us the green light for, and we get away with it. Like, I remember one of the hospitals I worked at, there was like this rooftop lounge, there was more executive type lounge, and we're not really supposed to go out there, but me and some of the sterile processing techs would sneak out there, in the evenings and have our lunch break, right? And it's just, those are the things that build that community that you're referencing. Yeah, these are people that I can trust, that I want to be with, that I want to work with. And man, if you get a team like that built, you can do some awesome and amazing things.
Yeah, it's funny. You mentioned the Bob Mars interview, and I'm going to shout back to your first interview. I think it was last season. It might have been season 11, where, we talked about building an industry that you love. And, that's all of this is part of that conversation. And I'll even go back to that sense of community as we interviewed the team in Idaho and, how they achieved, zero infections. And it had this like really strong sense of community. It's what bonds us. It's what ties us. It's what reinvigorates us. And conversations like this one bring that element of fun that are really integral to successfully doing all of those other pieces. And even to the point where if you go back to the very first interview from this season with Brian Dolan, and we talked about, just that leadership approach and how you build and engage everybody in the department. And there's lots of different ways that we've done that. But what I've liked about a lot of these types of conversations is that we are starting to take all these little elements and we're building a structure in the conversation about how you really get there and all the different ways to do it. So great job. Another awesome interview with Matthew today. That's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or your favorite podcast application. You can also access bonus content for certain episodes by downloading our smartphone application for iPhone and Android. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. And if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover on a future episode, just send an email to info@beyondclean.net. On behalf of Hank and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean.